Great. Okay, I think I'll start right in. So very, very warm welcome from me to Atlas Exchanging Knowledge, the lecture number 4 in our precious series. Today with Dr. Bie Plevoets and Dr. Inge Somers on As Found Experiments in Preservation. I'll give a few bits and pieces as an introduction before we head right in. So Atlas Exchanging Knowledge is an EU-funded project that is organized and run by the ECIA, which stands for the European Council of Interior Architects. And it is the organization that represents many, many thousands of interior architects and designers all across Europe. So today we also have a very wide range of nationalities and people from different countries in our audience, which we're very happy about. So thank you for zooming in. The ECIA has recently been awarded an EU grant for a project that's called Building on Connections for a Stronger Profession. And it aims to promote the diversity, the strength, and the wonderful work that we do within our discipline of interior architecture and design. And now the Atlas, in short, is a sub-project of this grant mission. And it is led by Professor Graham Brooker, who's the head of interior design at the Royal College of Art and who's with us today as well, who's the project manager of our little team. And then it's myself, the Atlas researcher, and also me organizing the lectures. And together we think that it is vital and so inspiring to share the knowledge within our discipline and with others to talk to each other about the rich work that is being produced in our field. And so we created two things, an archive, which we call the Atlas Archive, and the lecture series Atlas Exchanging Knowledge, leading up to the release of the archive in early spring next year with monthly lectures. So the Atlas is growing to become a huge online repository of all things interior architecture and design, a digital library collecting books, film, publications, papers, talks, magazines, apps, etc., all about a wide range of interior activity, from adaptive reuse over well-being, materiality, interior theory, and so on and so forth. And these lectures will be recorded. You can later find them on the Atlas, but you can also find them on YouTube. If you look up ECIA Atlas Exchanging Knowledge, you'll find the previous ones there. We already had a few, starting with Repair, with Dr. Silke Langenberg from ETH Zurich and Professor Graham Brooker from the Royal College of Art. We had Dr. Susie Atteville with us, together with Dr. Tune Christian Weigler from RMIT University on interior practice research PhDs. And we had Professor Ezi Manzini and Albert Faster with us from the Glasgow School of Art, talking about the city of proximity last month. There's 2 more lectures coming up for next year. One is on smart technology and interior design with Massimo Hamadi and Anja Dirks in January, as well as prioritizing health and well-being in interior design by Joanna Cloy and Matthew Freeman on the 21st of February next year. And now for today, I'm very honored and excited to have you both here. Today with us, our guest, Dr. Bie Plevoets, and from Hasselt University, together with Dr. Inge Somers from the University of Antwerp, leading the conversation today. Dr. Inge Somers is an interior architect and academic at the Department Design Sciences at the University of Antwerp. She is educational coordinator of the interior program and member of the research group Henry van der Velde. Her research focuses on the disciplinary identity of interior architecture and the development of theory and education within this field. Dr. Bie Plevoets, on the other hand, studied interior architecture and conservation and obtained a PhD on adaptive reuse at Hasselt University, where she's currently assistant professor in the research group TRACE. Her research focuses on adaptive reuse, theory, and various conceptual strategies to intervene in the existing fabric. We are very thankful to have you both here. The stage is yours. Welcome, Inge Somers and Bie Plevoets.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you, Miriam. Just another short introduction for Bie, I think. When I was asked to bring an interesting guest speaker for ECIA lecture series, I immediately thought of you, Bie, because I'm following your research activities already from the start. And having visiting the exhibition as found and reading the book, I was convinced that this subject could be of great interest for many interiorists and that it would fit perfectly within the series. As already mentioned, you were the co-curator of the exhibition as found, and it was a collaboration with the Flanders Architectural Institute and the cultural organization De Singel. And you were also the co-editor of the exhibition book, a very interesting book that was related to the exhibition. So today's lecture and talk will be about this exhibition and the book. So a warm welcome, you Bie, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Inge. Thank you, Inge and Miriam, for this introduction. So indeed, my talk today will be on the As Found project called As Found Experiments in Preservation. The project indeed included an exhibition and a book publication. The book publication, which is like a sort of exhibition catalog. You can see the cover here. It was also produced in Dutch. But we also try to do a lot of other activities related to this As Found project that actually VAi, the Flanders Architectural Institute, was the main organizer. And we did an international colloquium in Hasselt, also with the title As Found, in September last year. And we also did a student to close the exhibition as a sort of a finissage. We did a 10-day extended exhibition with student work from all the schools in Flanders that had studios on working with the existing, and from every school we selected one studio to exhibit in the Singel, and there was also an event organized around that. So to show a bit the broad scope that we try to create with this As Found project. The idea of the exhibition, so I will say exhibition, but it's exhibition and books, or the project in general, was actually to focus on new relationships between contemporary design on the one hand and heritage on the other hand. If we say heritage, I really mean heritage in the broadest possible sense of the word. So not only protected buildings, although that was part of the oeuvre or category of buildings that we studied, but also buildings that are more modest, or sometimes even not so interested, but that we inherited like from past generations, and that we have at hand to work with to create a contemporary built environment. So we wanted to look at experimental, groundbreaking examples, both from Belgium as international. And we wanted actually to explore different positions that contemporary designers adopt when they work with existing buildings. And we did so by identifying 7 experimental approaches in which you could intervene to, in a way, promote or encourage a building culture that really starts from working with the existing rather than thinking from building anew. So the 7 experiments that we had formulated were ensemble, void, reconfiguration, inside out, traces, mirror, and nuance. I will briefly explain a bit what for us we meant with these terms. Ensemble dealt with on the one hand, buildings that had been designed as an ensemble, where architecture, interior, furniture, every aspect was actually designed as a sort of Gesamtkunstwerk, but that through time, somehow through adaptations, this ensemble was lost or got fragmented. And then how, as a designer, to intervene to recreate a sort of ensemble in a way that is not restorative. On the other hand, ensemble also refers to places that sometimes grew over time and that through these different interventions that happened, form in the end a sort of ensemble that belongs together, although it was never designed at once. And then when you're, as an architect, need to intervene in such an ensemble, how then to relate to that and how to do that. The second strategy, void. Usually when we think about architecture and interior architecture, we think about making things, adding things, but sometimes taking away, removing things can also be a way to create spaces that are useful or that can have different sort of functions. The third strategy, reconfiguration, is about the fragmentation of buildings into building materials or building fragments, and the recomposition of these fragments into new uses. And this is a topic which is, at least in Belgium, but I think also in many other countries, a really prominent topic in the architectural discourse, mostly from an ecological perspective. But what we wanted to focus on in the exhibition is also the cultural meanings that can be passed over by reusing materials from buildings from the past, or how reconfiguration of fragments can actually create a new meaning within a building. Then the fourth category was inside out, that dealt with ideas of relationship or different relationships between interior and exterior. So the modernist dogma that the exterior is a sort of expression of the interior of the building, of the plan of a building, is something that is strongly challenged when giving a building a new purpose, a different one than it was designed for. And how then to work with that and how to change this relationship between interior and exterior. That was inside out. Traces, as a strategy, wanted to reflect on the sort of new approach to restorative practices. Usually a traditional restoration aims to bring a building back in a specific time frame of the past. So it chooses a heyday and there it restores back to. But what happens if we try to combine different layers or to preserve different layers alongside and overlapping with one another? Mirror reflected on this aspect of copying and citation. How can we, as a designer, copy or imitate or mirror or quote architects or designs from the past? And then the last strategy or experiment is nuance, and therefore we wanted to end with that strategy, because in the other strategies that we showed, or many of the cases that I will show you later that illustrate this approach, we see very far-going interventions. Well, we think that sometimes the strongest projects or projects where just a very small intervention can make a really big change to how a building is used or experienced. And that was this last strategy. Maybe something about the exhibition design, because I think specifically in a context where we talk about interiors, also the design of the exhibition is interesting in that respect. So maybe first something about the curatorial aspect. So for each of these strategies, which we or experiments that we formulated, we choose one project located in Belgium by an office from Flanders or Brussels that illustrated that strategy. And we confronted that one project that was shown like extensively with a lot of material with reference projects or from other countries, or sometimes also for a different time frame, because the main projects were mostly from the last years, last decades maximum, while sometimes we also wanted to refer to post-war architectural interventions, for example. The scenography was done by Feld Architecture and Design. And what they did was, so the given space was an exhibition space in De Singel cultural institution in Antwerp. And it was really a sort of wide box, very typical exhibition space where a lot of things can move in order to allow a very flexible setup for the scenography. And they tried also to approach this space, or they looked at this as an as found, and what actually can we do with the space by adding as little as possible. And what they did was to remove the or take out the planks in the floor, which were loose, to make connections. So they brought them up. They did the same for the ceiling panels that were movable. And these two elements were connected with very small iron wires to create the walls on which the 7 experiments were exhibited. And all the other materials that were used for the scenography, the frames, the sockles to present the models, everything was taken from the storage from the Singel from earlier exhibitions. So there was no new material added except for the iron wires on which the frames were hung. And this creates also an interesting spatial experience of the room. Also the lights, they lowered them to create a sort of ceiling. So a very distinct spatial experience, actually, by just the reorganization of what was already there. To explain you to explain you a bit the projects that we use to illustrate the different strategies, I will walk with you through the book. I will not elaborate on all the pages, so sometimes I will just click through, but then at least you get a sort of impression of the exhibition catalog. So here you see the cover showing a detail of a project by Korteknisch Stoelmacher Architecten, Callebout Architecten en Bureau Bouwtechniek in Mechelen. I will show it later in the presentation. So I was one of the curators. So my co-curators were Sophie de Kenny, who was at that time the director of the Flanders Architectural Institute, and Julia Ertzas, who was who is the curator, the main curator for the Flanders Architectural Institute, and who had done already different exhibitions with the VAi. And together we also did this book. So in the book, we confronted each of these strategies also with a theoretical essay, for which we invited a colleague from Belgium or abroad to write an essay. I will not elaborate on the essays today, but here you can have a preview of the table of contents. So maybe why did we call it experiments? Because we wanted to show projects that experiment with how to deal with the existing. We were also referring to the book Experimental Preservation by Otto Fayos, Erik Langdahl, and Tordes Arrhenius, because we found that a very beautiful approach also in which they refer to other disciplines such as art practices to also get inspiration from that. And that was an approach that we really appreciated, and that we also found when we were talking to the architects that presented projects in the exhibition, that many of them also relate to all sorts of sources in which they found inspiration. The title As Found, the English title, because the Dutch title was Gevonden Architectuur, so found architecture, if I would translate it literally, but the English title was As Found, and that refers to a text by Allison and Peter Smithson. The Found and the As Found and the Found is a title of this text, and in that text they describe their way of looking at the built environment, analyzing it, and opening or creating a sort of openness in their way of looking, of approaching the existing. An openness for the prosaic things, for the everyday, and for everyday objects, but also everyday uses, and how people interact with spaces beyond the consciously designed spaces. And they say that As Found is a sort of a design attitude, and we found that also interesting when we started to work on the exhibition, and when we had selected the project that we wanted to show. We started to meet the architects in their offices to just ask us to explain the project again to us. And then we really saw that they the way that they approach the site through the design process was very different. So for some of the projects, the whole explanation was given around 3 models. For another project, they had like really an enormous amount of historical research that formed sort of starting point or source of inspiration. Yet for other projects, it was a very extensive documentation of the site via professional photography, hand drawings, etc. So that's we also try to show in the exhibition, and therefore we decided not to do any post-production. So what we did was really show the material that the architects already had in their archives, because we believed that that was the way to also show not only an end result, but also design process. And by doing that, we try to make the exhibition as interesting as possible for a wide audience. So both people that are not so acquainted with adaptive reuse practice in Flanders yet, for example, younger students, but also architects who really work in the field, by getting a sort of insight in the design process of their colleagues. They could also get a sort of new input on a project that they might already be familiar with. So the only post-production actually that we did was for each project, we made a movie, or we asked to have a movie made in which the architect explains the project on site. And these clips are still on YouTube, so you can still look back at them if you're interested in one particular project to see a bit more on that. Here you can see I have the book here with me at hand. So what we did was for each, it's not so clear, I think. Oh, I'm on blur. So for each project, we had like a double page with the reference projects, which could also work as a sort of a bladwijzer. I don't know, Inge, how to say that in English. Yes,
I don't know either.
To keep track on where you are in the book, like a paper that you put or a card somewhere in your
between
book.
the pages.
Yes, between the pages. So that in which we had the reference project shown. That was just some pictures that we selected with an image caption, so no extensive descriptions. And then and it was also like that in the exhibition. So a few images plus captions, so no elaborate explanation for people that wanted actually to further investigate or to position somehow the experiment in the broader context. So for ensemble, for example, this project by Hasselt and Brussels was also a way to zoom in and zoom out on different scales. So for example, this is an urban project, while some of the reference projects are really focused on interior. So that allowed us also to play with different scales or to confront.
May I ask something, Bie? How did you make the choice for this reference project? Because I can imagine there were many.
Yes.
How were the ones for the book or the exhibition were picked?
I think that the reference project for us as curators was most difficult to select. Yes. Because we started from long lists. Also, the selection of the projects in general, it was a bit back and forth between selecting projects, formulating strategies. So that went in a direction. But for the main project, the Belgian project, that I found less difficult than this reference project, because they aimed to broaden also the team. So we try to these different scales that I refer to. So to show projects that work on different scales, also different regions. So to move beyond Flanders, but also show projects from elsewhere in Europe, and also in a certain extent outside Europe. And then also because we didn't have much space, so to say, to elaborate on the project, it should also be very clear and obvious, because sometimes we had very interesting projects that were difficult to show the strength of the intervention in 3 pictures. Mm-hmm. So that was also sort of pragmatic
choice
criteria, a sort of educational, like how can we bring the most of it. We also tried to mix projects that are well known, but maybe that are not looked at in this particular, from this particular perspective. For example, for Inside Out, we also developed an argument on facadism, and then we showed the Tate Modern in London, which is a project that many people know, but we showed then a project, an image during the construction works where you just see the facade standing and nothing else. So that's a project that most people that visit the exhibition might have known, but not this particular image. Or also, like, for example, Caruso St. John is also an office that most people that are within the field know of, but we choose then an early project that is not so obvious. So I was happy to hear, for example, that architects really working in the field told us afterwards that they had found in the reference projects some projects that they didn't know yet. So
that was very inspiring, I think. Addition.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do I continue explaining some of the projects, Inge? Is that fine? So maybe the first one, Steen. I think that's a very interesting project. A lot to say about, but I will try to focus on the on the experiment. So Steen is often considered the oldest building in Antwerp, but its history is quite complex and turbulent. So the actual medieval fabric in that building is very limited. Here you can see a picture on this page from, I think, early 20th century. I should check the caption. But so it was originally part of the, here you can see the project, how it is now. I will come back to that later. So here was the, do you see my cursor? Yes. So here in black was the location of its Steen. It was originally an entrance gate to the city of Antwerp and was part of its fortification wall. But in the 19th century, here the river Scheldt was changed, and so it was widened, and a large part of the medieval fabric was demolished for that, and its Steen was kept here in black, but it became a sort of isolated object that didn't really show anymore how it was integrated in the fortification wall. So this was the fragment that remained. And then what happened is that they made a Viollet-le-Duc-like stylistic restoration in which its Steen was presented as a medieval castle, which it actually never had been in its history. Then also in 20th century, parts were still, again, removed from that structure, other parts were added. And then a design competition was held to renovate the building, to make it a sort of entrance gate to the city of Antwerp for tourists coming to the city by boat or by other means. So it would be a sort of tourist information point, an exhibition space for the city, but also all sort of more technical aspects that had to be solved within the building, also to make some urban connections and bring them back. So it was a very difficult, challenging program that had to be realized. And the winning competition was this project by Noah Architects. What they did was to go back to this idea of the 19th century. So the imaginary castle that was made of Steen, and they continued that approach. But they look for an architectural language that on the one hand is contemporary, but at the other hand also reminds of a castle, massive architecture. This is the view from the waterfront where the extension is very visible. This is a view from the side, but here, for example, from this view, you cannot actually see the extension. So the extension is from that view quite moderate. The project was also interesting to show because when it opened or when the scaffolding was removed, it created an enormous debate because people didn't find it beautiful. There was a petition organized to demolish the extension. So it also shows how people feel related to working with the existing. So in that sense, it was like a perfect opener for us for our exhibition. Although it was not well received by the general public at first, it was very well received by architectural experts, also by other parts of the local community. So it was a very strongly debated project. Personally, I like it very much. Also the interiors, which are like with very beautiful materials. Also the renovation of the exteriors of the old part, which are here not shown in the book, because we tried also for the projects to really focus on how they relate to ensemble. So here it's seen as an ensemble is growing throughout time. And then the extension actually tries to work with that ensemble, also creating a sort of urban or recreating an urban connection. So we focus for this project a bit less on the interiors, but these are also very, very beautiful and very interesting. Here again, some other pictures. That's Voigt. As I said, works with creating or removing as a design tactics. For example, this project by Peter Latz in Turin, where actually a lot of the existing fabric of the former industrial site is removed. But by doing so, what remains become really strong and iconic, and also is very extensively used by people in Turin. And the project that we choose for Voigt, this is an essay by Jonathan Hill, is Chapex in Charleroi. At the time that we published the book, the project was not finished, so we showed construction pictures, but for this particular project or to illustrate the strategy, that wasn't really a problem. But if you're interested in the projects, there are new pictures which are also really showing even another layer than what we were able to show back then. So Chapex was located in Charleroi. It was used as a location to organize fairs. It's 60,000 square meters. It was an enormous building that needed to be renovated. At the time it was built, Charleroi was really in its economic heyday. Today, that's really not the situation anymore. So the building became actually too large for its function. So this is a project by Agua and Jan de Velde and Inge Vink, with a lot of other collaborators as well. And what they proposed, because the budget to renovate the building was too limited to renovate it entirely, they renovated a small portion of the building up to like, or renovated it to an extent that it could be heated to an indoor climate. Other parts were renovated, but to be used like unheated. And then yet another part, the middle part, was stripped from its facade, walls, and only the main structure was kept, so the structure and the roof, creating a very open space that could be used for all sorts of functions. So it was not really formally programmed. It can be used for informal sport activities in the city, flea markets, as an extension of the fair, but then outside. And here you can see some images of how this building originally looked. Here you can see some images of this middle portion. So there are stairs added to connect the different floors. While they were doing the renovation, there was already the potential of this space, because it was also creating new urban connections, because this very large building originally separated also two parts of the city. But by opening up the middle part, you had a new urban connection that was created. And therefore, they So the bouwmeester, because it was a project that was coordinated by the bouwmeester of Charleroi, also really recognized its potential and tried to find the funds to also develop a landscape project within. So although it was not part of the original competition design, even before the building was or before that competition design was fully implemented or executed, there was already a second or a follow-up project to make a landscape intervention, show actually how this act of removing, of opening up spaces can also show a potential almost immediately. And here you can see some drawings and some more pictures. Maybe to say something about the interior, there is also a very beautiful intervention which we didn't show in the exhibition because at that time it wasn't finished yet, by Doorzon Architecten. Doorzon Interior Architects, and what they did is to make new furniture with building materials and fragments that were removed at the site. But here also what I find interesting is the very robust and structure. There's the bare structure, which is so shown in some parts, and then in other parts these interior details are preserved and really remind of the fact that this was formerly an interior. In the newer picture, this is even more outspoken. I don't know, Inge, how far I go in explaining other projects. Do I just show them, or is there one that you think I really need to show?
We talked about it before, and we said everything is interesting. Yeah. So it's a very hard choice to pick out some of them. I think this one is also a very interesting one.
Yes.
And maybe we can skip the inside out as you explained, because it's a difficult one.
Yes, I will show this one by Hasselt. Maybe I should also not do Hasselt Cicek. This is a project by also a colleague of mine at Hasselt University, Hasselt Cicek. It's a scenographic project, exterior, but in a certain way, it's really an interior architectural project. So I think I should show it also here. It's the reconfiguration of an open-air depot of the KISS collection. It's Kunst in de Stad, Art in the City collection of the city of Antwerp. So it's our statues that were previously exhibited in public space at roundabouts or on buildings, etc., but that were removed from their urban location, often because of practical reasons, renovation works, for example. But many of the statues, if we look at them now, also have or tell stories or narratives that today we feel do not belong anymore within the public or shouldn't be celebrated within the public space, such as, for example, statues reminding of the colonial past of Belgium and also celebrating that colonial project. So several of the statues also reminded of that. What Hasselt Cicek did was to, so here you can see some of the pictures showing how the statues were originally exposed. Here, for example, you see a Baron Danis monument where you see a colonial scene with the colonizer, the Baron, who is like on the highest platform. Here you see an Arab slave trader who bows towards the colonizer. And then here you have an African mother and child who somehow thank Baron Danis for his deeds. So this statue was removed because there was a tree which fell on it during a storm. It was damaged and therefore it was removed from the public space, but I don't know exactly what year it was removed, but it was already for a very long time in the depot. And that was just to give an example. So here is the plan. What Hasselt Cicek did was to reconfigure, to make a new composition of the different statues and creating new relationships between different statues within the depot. For example, here there are 4 composers. Sometimes it's thematically. also there was no difficult narrative. It was just by accident. There were 4 composers found in the depot, and they were brought together on one pedestal. Here, the Franse Furie, that is a sculpture that was difficult to move up because then it would be damaged. So therefore, for practical reasons, it was kept lying down. Yeah, as you can see here, but it's a hollow statue. So in a way, it's also interesting to see how it is actually made. So if you walk around it, you can also see the statue in a different way. Here are the 4 composers. But for example, if we look at the colonial scene of Baron Danes, what she does there is to remove Baron Danes from his high pedestal and bringing him on the same level as the Arab slave trader. He's also unarmed, or yeah, his weapon, he lost part of his weapon, and that was also just not restored. And because the statue of the mother and child that was not in the depot, probably it was too heavily damaged and therefore not kept, is replaced by another mother and child figure, which was then put on a higher pedestal than the other statues to somehow change the hierarchy and relationship between these different objects. Actually, there were many other sculpture groups where I could talk about, also about Leopold II, but I will not go in depth here.
Bie, can I add
Yes.
something? What was interesting in the book also was referred to was the idea of spolia. Could you explain a little bit more on that in regard to this approach of reconfiguration?
Yes, I think this idea of spolia was, I think, mostly related to the
Reference.
also to the reference projects, because this concept of spolia refers to practices in the late Roman era, where elements, usually marble fragments, decorative iconographic fragments, were reintegrated in new buildings, also as an act of reuse for pragmatical reasons, but often also to transmit meaning from one side to another. And it's a practice which actually did not only occur in the late Roman Empire, but which continued to be used, especially, for example, in Rome, in early Christian churches, for example, you see that a lot, actually up to the Renaissance. It was usually related to marble fragments because the quality of the marble material. So it was definitely an ecological or economical reason. But for example, for the Santa Maria Trastevere, for example, this church, when it was renovated in the Renaissance, they used some of the columns from the baths of Caracalla, which were also at the time a very important ruin in the city of Rome. So this moving of the columns from the baths of Caracalla to the church also was to show to also give a message, to show the political power of and economic power of the Pope who commissioned the rebuilding of the church. So we refer to that concept of spolia because we somehow wanted to go beyond the ecological and logistical discourse, which is definitely important. So it's not to criticize that, but to add another layer to this practice of reuse of materials as a way to transfer meanings, sometimes from one side to another side, or if it's within the same project. For example, for the Sala Beckett project by Flores and Prats, where they reused a lot of doors, windows, etc., within the same site, but on new locations, for which they had often also to rebuild and to adapt these elements to fit in their new place. But that really creates a building that, have a very, that still strongly refers to what has been there before. Especially on the elements of the interior. So the door which you touch and this very sentimental objects, so to say.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this project by Bart Hollanders, what they did was to actually rethink this modernist idea of the facade as the expression of what happens in the interior. What they did was they kept the facade of the building and they adapted the plan to the rhythm of the facade. So they used the doors and the window openings as a grid to organize the interior. And also now that it's already further developed, this project, when it will be finished, I think the interior will be really interesting. Wait, I want to show one picture. For example, they work a lot with colored bricks. And this is a material that you usually find in Belgium a lot for facades, especially Art Deco facades, this emaille colored brickwork. And that is something that they here use on the interior. So it creates an ambiguity between interior, exterior character in a very, or expressions in a very interesting and intriguing manner, I believe. Traces. So this is the project in Mechelen that I also mentioned on the cover, which was a ruin where they tried to consolidate the building in its ruinous conditions. And then in this process of transformation, bringing different layers or interweaving different layers with each other. But for which they, if you see the black, yellow, red plants, at first sight it seems that they did not much, but actually they had to do a lot to be able to do that. And then for Mirror, we showed two projects by the same office, a renovation project by Robrecht and Daan and a new building by Robrecht and Daan. The renovation project was of the Boekentoren building by Henri van der Velde, like one of the important early 20th century, early modernist architects in Belgium. They renovated this building, and while they were working on this project, got a commission to design an archive a bit further away. And you see that they really borrowed a lot of characteristics from the Henri van der Velde project and implemented it in the Rijks archive. And it's both on typology and organization, as well as on interior layout and finishings. And then the last project, Nuance. There we choose a project by Carton 123, a youth center in Brussels. And the intervention is really minimal. It was a project that was developed a lot through participation. It's actually just the ground floor that is renovated of this building. And it's through participation that they found that the kitchen was a very important element for the youth in the neighborhood. They really wanted to gather around the kitchen to eat together. And that's how that got a really prominent place also within the youth center. And they also extended it to the exterior, where they also made a small barbecue place. In this project, they also had to think about privacy and openness, and also all these design decisions were informed by this participatory trajectory. Inge, I think we managed to go through all the projects. The last one's a bit more quick, but
yes. It gives already a very fine overview of the different projects and and the approach of the complete exhibition and book, I think. So thank you very much, Bie.
Do I stop sharing?
Oh no, we can keep it as a background, I think. Maybe I have some questions for you. An interesting part, Graham is joining us too. An interesting part in the book I found was at the end, the discussion of the talk with the experts in transformation. And what struck me was that at one point there was the experts were talking about the kind of paradigm shift as well within heritage as in architecture. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that. It was about heritage. They said that at the moment heritage is far broader defined than it was before, and that makes it possible to do also other kind of transformations than in the past. And when it was in regard to architecture, it was that there was a bigger focus of architects at the moment on urban projects, difficult urban projects in sites that were not always that accessible or difficult to transform. And that there is a growing interest for architects just to dive into this kind of projects and transformation more than in the past. Is that something that you can subscribe? Is that something that you see also in the evolution of the years that you've been working on this kind of themes?
Yes, I think the working with the existing, both heritage as well as not heritage, especially in a context as Belgium, has become like the new normal, so to say. Sometimes I'm really wondering like how much relevancy there still is. When we were starting with the research group focusing on adaptive reuse, I think for Graham it was even stronger because he has been working on the topic longer than we have. It was unusual, and it was something that really had to be promoted, while today it feels as almost evident that you first consider if it's possible to renovate rather than to build anew. Although, of course, I have a group of international students, so I'm teaching in an international master, and I feel that it's really not everywhere in the world as evidence, and also not in all fields of architecture and construction as well. So yes, so but despite what I also think that came out of the interview, which is related to what you said, is that there is a very strong connection between heritage and architecture in Belgium. And also that is something that I think is unusual in other countries, even in the Netherlands, which for a long time in Belgium, we've looked at the Netherlands as an example, also in relation to adaptive reuse. But I think that we're in a unique position, where heritage is very open to also allow new interventions, as long as they are qualitative, if they are supported with enough historical architectural research. But when there is a good motivation and the intervention is carefully considered, there is a strong openness. And that I find, I feel very privileged to be able to work in this context on this topic.
There's a kind of more pragmatic approach, I think, at the moment, as long as the building can be used. And the use is a kind of guarantee to be regarded as a kind of functional thing, to continue in its use.
Yes, but I think we shouldn't say only pragmatic approach, because I think there is also a lot of emphasis on architectural quality in the field of heritage for the more recent projects that are developed. So if you would say a solely pragmatic approach, then for example, you could say as long as the intervention is reversible, do whatever. I think that's really not the attitude at the moment in Belgium. I think there is a very careful consideration if there are interventions done. Do they serve the reuse on the long term, maybe also exceeding the functions that we have in mind for the future years? So I think this reasoning is there very strongly with architects who feel responsible also for heritage. So it's not only an openness from the field of heritage, but also architects and interior architects that also develop a sensitivity towards heritage, that feel responsible for preservation of the existing, for ecological, but also for cultural reasons. So yeah.
Okay. Maybe Graham want to add something?
Yeah, if I don't mind. Thanks, Bie. That was really lovely, and not only just for the content, but it brought back some fond memories of the visit to Hasselt last year in September, which, gosh, it's over a year ago now, so time flies. Thank you. Really enjoyed it. And I think an observation and then a question, really. I think you're right about heritage. I think it's, for years, preservation, heritage studies, maybe even, you know, the fields of archaeology, which I find increasingly interesting, they've been considered as kind of slightly conservative backwaters of built environment practices. And whereas I've always thought completely the opposite, that these are actually some of the most radical areas of built environment production and interior work and architectural work. And I think people are recognizing that now, and I think it's being recognized by the profession itself, because I think it's really able to really become quite open and exciting. And I think that's a keen observation of all of this work, really. But my question was around the use of strategy, because I think that the book is and the exhibition were organized around these wonderful strategies, and I'm a very keen strategist person. And I wonder whether you had any more thoughts about why strategy and not the C word, as in concept and so on and so forth. And could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, we used the word experiment in the end to name the approaches or strategies or concepts. Also to steer the debate, I think, because the idea of the exhibition was also not to like, we as curators will tell the architects how to intervene or which approaches to implement, but to create it as a platform for discussion also. And then the word experiment, an experiment can fail, an experiment allows for critique, although of course we choose projects that we like, that we think are successful, but still it's interesting to allow that discussion on how far can we go. Maybe for a non-protected building, this idea of reconfiguration is interesting, but when something is protected, it's a different story. Also for students, for example, to bring in new cases from their home country. So we have tried to have these discussions. And that's also opened up the discourse. So that's why we choose the word experiment rather than strategy or concept. But
Thank you. Thanks. I think there's a question in there. Let's see. There's a question saying, working on heritage, and what about sustainability? What do you feel about that?
I think the whole starting point for the exhibition was also an ecological consideration, that to green the built environment, because the built environment is, or the building practice, the building sector, is a enormous waste and emission, creates enormous CO2 emissions. So to green the built environment, thinking from what is existing and work with that is a sustainable approach or an ecological approach. And with the exhibition, I think we wanted to show that it can go beyond the maybe most evident or objects, but that sometimes, for example, I think especially the Mortsel case by Eagles of Architecture, where they were what we had presented under Inside Out, but that is really a building that I think if you would ask many architects if it's a beautiful building, most people would say not really. It's maybe rather ugly. And then still to preserve that and to work with that, it's somehow brave also as an architect. And then this ecological discourse, I think, can also strengthen the argument, like we will do it, but not only for ecological reasons. We also believe that this is an iconic building, which for the people of Mortsel is their city hall. If it's beautiful or not, it's the city hall. So we will work with that and we will make it more beautiful. And that's a different attitude, I think.
I think so. And I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I'm conscious that every time we talk about building reuse, heritage, preservation, all of these wonderful terms, in a way, sustainability as a word has been around for a while. And I think, I don't know about you, but I tend to think of it as just being totally implicit into every aspect of reuse and all of these words, heritage and preservation, reconstruction, conservation. And I'm conscious that every now and again, when I, like yourself, maybe when doing talks like this, I quite often get this question, which is, well, what about sustainability? And I never see them as separate. I always imagine that it's just exactly the same as what we're talking about. So it's interesting, isn't it, that people are still saying, what about sustainability? And maybe we have to always, be quite explicit about all of these practices are completely sustainable because they're using stuff that's already with us rather than new build and starting from scratch.
Could it be that it is a focus on technological sustainability more?
Might be, yeah.
And maybe the question is on that, and that's really complicated sometimes. If you want to do a transformation and you have all these techniques and all these requirements at the moment for having these technological sustainable systems. And that to implement that in the building is quite an ordeal sometimes, no?
Yes, I think that's what they struggle with at first at Chapex, which was a problem that with the budget they had and the enormous size of the building, just to renovate the roof to an acceptable cost, then they didn't even have enough budget to do that. So that also the use or the way the building could be used also resulted from the conditions that were there. Okay, we can use a part, but unheated. And that's even, if you just don't heat space, that's even better than heating and insulating. And so also I think, and that's maybe something that there was in the Chapex project, but I think there are many also adaptive reuse projects that somehow rethink the relationship between interior and exterior space for internal comfort, so to say. That formerly exterior spaces, formerly interior spaces that were meant to be heated towards interior comfort become spaces that we use unheated or only with daylight or different kind of ways of using space. And that's something that in the exhibition wasn't that present. But I think that is one angle of adaptive reuse that could be further developed in the future. Because it's also about some typologies might lend themselves really well to rethinking this kind of spaces.
One more question in the chat. There's a nice observation from Tuna Kristen. Hello, Tuna Kristen. Thank you. Somebody said, can you describe more about the participatory aspect within the adaptive reuse strategy?
I don't think she can use her microphone, but it's still really great.
Do you see that question? Can you describe more about the participatory?
I don't see the question, but I understood, I think, the question from what you...
something about the participatory aspect within the adaptive reuse strategy that you mentioned earlier. Thanks.
It's something in Belgium, for example, a lot of projects that go via the bouwmeesters. There is an explicit or public project. There is an explicit question to do participation, but often it is more ticking a checkbox than really influencing the design. So that's why we really liked the Carton 123 project, the youth house, because there we felt when we were talking to the architects that it was really the conversations with the youngsters and also the observations of how they were using, because there was a sort of playground or informal football field or something just next to it before this project was developed, that it was really from a true engagement with the local community that the project was developed. And that's also why we wanted to include it in the exhibition. But of course, that is not so easy to show, but we try to do so. And also in the movie, it's explained, and also in some of the images that we showed in the exhibition. For example, for Steen, it's often said that the fact that the project was not well received by the public was because there has not been enough participation. I don't know if that is exactly the reason for the somehow bad start of
maybe a better communication had been interesting, because it was covered all the time, and then the covering went down, and it was like boom, this building was there, and really a lot of people were shocked because they never saw anything in advance. I think there was a kind of shock effect.
Although there were a lot of, there was an exhibition made, it was published before the images, but in conversations with the architects, what they also said is that here on a 3D image or on the visuals beforehand, because there is a very strong similarity between the old fabric and the new, that for many people it wasn't maybe so obvious what the intervention would be or what the scale of the intervention would be, because the contrast is so soft between the old and the new. If they're very close to this is a Zaha Hadid intervention Havenhuis, where you have at Havenhuis, you have the Zaha Hadid building on top. If you see an image of that beforehand, it's in your head, you will not forget, it's very obvious what will happen. While here, probably there had been images were published, but it was still not so clear what that would mean in spatial terms. Maybe it's
okay.
We have to look at our time.
Yeah, I think we have to, don't we? There's no more questions in the chat, and so I think we can probably start to draw to a close.
Thank you very much, Inge and Bie, for joining us today. It was very, very interesting and inspiring to see the exhibition, the publication, the works, the different strategies, and thank you for joining. It was really a pleasure to listen to your work in the exhibition.
Yes, thank you very much, Bie.
It was a pleasure to be invited and to contribute to the Atlas. So thank you for your interesting questions.
Thanks, Miriam. Great to see you.
Thank you so much.
And thanks, Ruri, for sorting out. And thanks, everybody. And we'll see you in the new year. And in the meantime, have a great Christmas and New Year. And hope you all get some rest and some break time. And see you soon. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.